أجنبي غير مسلم يتحدث وهو مذهول عن نبوءات القرآن التي تحققت بدقة مرعبة في عالمنا الحديث. هذا الرجل يعبر عن حيرته ودهشته متسائلا كيف عرف كتاب منذ 14 قرنا كل هذه التفاصيل؟ هل هذه النبوءات إشارة إلى سر إلهي يفوق الفهم البشري؟ ويسأل هل هي مصادفة مذهلة تثير الجدل؟ لنبدأ.
So today we're talking about the end time prophecies of the Quran. If you don't know the Quran, it is the holy book for Muslims. In Islam, obviously you have the Sunnah, the Hadiths, the life philosophy of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and then the Quran, which was dictated by Allah to the Prophet and then transcribed by many of the scribes around him. And in this text, there's very, very many fascinating predictions of the end times. Now, again, if you're not Muslim, I implore you to come in with an open mind and just hear the words of this great book that have obviously, shaped the world that we live in. And if you are Muslim, tell me if I missed anything. Tell me if I got anything wrong. Like I said, I did not grow up Muslim. I didn't know many Muslims growing up, so I'm coming at this in good faith, no pun intended. So, where do we start? How about 14 centuries ago? Okay, there's this text in the Arabian desert that has very many interesting details. A lot of prophecies so precise that they read almost like headlines, right? And, the Quran and its end time predictions, they're not necessarily just, vague metaphors. Some people might interpret them that way, but to Muslims and to people of the time are detailed glimpses into the future, from the rise of sky-piercing towers in the Gulf to the transformation of deserts into lush gardens. The prophecies paint a vivid picture of, the world that we live in, maybe today, maybe in 5 years, maybe in 10, who knows? I mean, what makes these predictions interesting and remarkable to me isn't just the accuracy, it's how interconnected they are, like pieces of a puzzle. Each prophecy connects to other prophecies, and that forms this complex web of signs that many, Muslim scholars have been trying to decode for centuries. And again, we're not just going to analyze the isolated events. We're trying to understand the orchestrated pattern that was foretold over, a millennium ago. So, how did this ancient text describe, the architectural ambitions of the Gulf states, or, the environmental changes, or maybe the most intriguingly, the social and technological revolutions that occurred in just a few hundred years that really, bring us into the world that we know today. So the predictions we go through today will not be in chronological order necessarily or on any specific ancient text. They'll just be in no order, just based off what I think is most interesting. So first, the architectural revolution. All right. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, one big old peace be upon him for this whole episode, just for the sake of time. He basically says maybe the most unexpected architectural prediction ever. So in a hadith that, would make modern real estate developers, make their head spin, he basically says this, quote, "When you see barefoot, naked, destitute shepherds competing in constructing tall buildings, then we know that the hour is near." I mean, that's a pretty bold prediction. Again, this is a time like pre-Arab oil, like before oil was even used in the way that we understand. Again, this was written by scribes, transcribed from Allah, according to Muslims. I think it was in the 600s. Okay. And recently, breaking news, Trump has said that he's going to build a giant casino and resort in Gaza. So, if that's not a pretty direct, a direct prediction. But that's not the only place. Obviously, Abu Dhabi, Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, Dubai with, maybe the tallest skyscraper in the world. These are just a few of them. Let's get into it, okay? So, pre-oil Arabia. This is where the Quran describes in Surah Ibrahim a valley without civilization. We're talking about a place where the biggest architectural decisions was basically like, which side of like a Bedouin tent got better views of sand. Like for real. Like you need to look at pictures of this region, around like Mecca and Saudi Arabia in even like the 1800s. It was barren. It was just a massive desert that these Bedouins would kind of just wander around in. And, they were pastoralists and they were raising their cattle and they had their own lives. Okay. The same land where in Surah Al-Fajr, they mention the ancient Iram, which is a city of lofty pillars. Little did anyone know that the descendants of these people that made these little lofty pillars would eventually build skyscrapers that truly are some of the biggest in the world. I mean, crazy. So this goes on for basically a millennium, and then an oil boom. And suddenly these barefoot shepherds weren't just getting shoes, they're getting Ferraris and construction companies. The Quran's verse in Surah Al-Qasas talks about favoring those who were oppressed in the land and making them leaders, which, again, many people interpret to say, this is the ultimate rags to riches, right? This is, sort of, pearl divers and pastoralists that all of a sudden are now building massive skyscrapers into the sky. I mean, the Burj Khalifa, if you've never seen it, you should look it up. We'll get a picture up on screen here. 828 meters tall, standing there like a giant, exclamation point to this prophecy in the Quran. When the Quran mentions in Surah Al-Rahman about passing, quote, beyond the beyond the regions of the heavens. I mean, the humankind, specifically these Arab Muslims in the Middle East, are building these massive buildings into the heavens. Maybe they took it seriously. Maybe they read the Quran. They're like, yo, that's a good idea. And what's interesting about this sort of divine saga is it gets even more real. So in Surah Al-Takathur, it warns about competition in this sort of worldly sense. So literally, it talks about this. Competition in worldly increase diverts you until you visit the graves. This is in the 102nd chapter of the Quran. We've got cities competing for the title of the tallest building in the world, building shapes, of buildings like diamonds and rocket ships and these architectural plans that, literally are just changing the entire landscape of the Middle East. That is a great point, Gabe, that the people didn't hear because you whispered it so quietly. The Tower of Babel is kind of a similar vibe. Obviously, in Christianity and Judaism, there's this idea of the Tower of Babel that the people of this region of Babylon, I think. I'm not positive. We're building this giant structure, and God disrupted it. He broke it down and cast people around the world. And it's some people I've heard interpret as like excess technology, that the people are moving away from God and too focused on their technological advances. But this seems like a similar kind of prediction in the Quran, saying like, hey, we're don't compete against each other for who can build the most amazing thing. Again, it is important to mention, I find, with Islam, understanding the history of Islam, right? There's so much polytheism and paganism happening around Mecca at the time of the Prophet that the maybe the most fundamental component of Islam, as it appears to me, is this tenet of monotheism. It is the only unforgivable sin in Islam, to my knowledge. I'm sorry if I missed that. But it's this idea of Tawhid. Can you Google that actually really quick, Gabe? Tawhid is the name of basically having multiple gods. And I think that ultimately this verse, it seems like, is it's basically a rebuke of this idea of like, hey, don't worship the earth, don't worship things, don't worship man's creation, don't worship these big buildings, worship Allah. Is that right? Tawhid?
Islam Tawhid refers to the concept of the absolute oneness and unity of God.
Yes, that God is perfectly one, and that there are not multiple gods. There's only one force, and his name is Allah. So by building things, and worshiping man's creation, it's kind of a violation of Tawhid, is what I'm assuming, which is, it seems like, what the Hadiths and the Quran here are describing. So in Surah Al-Araf, it mentions, it reminds us to remember the favors of Allah. And these former shepherds are remembering them in, giant penthouses with views that just kind of look at clouds, basically. And so you could say the prophecy not only came true, but it has, it's true with valet parking and, maybe some women from, Russia, I'm just saying it is an interesting prediction. Not only does the Quran talk about, obviously, buildings, but it also speaks about environmental prophecies. So in a remarkable hadith narrated by Imam Muslim, the Prophet Muhammad predicted, quote, the hour will not be established until the land of Arabia returns to meadows and rivers. Now, again, the hour that we talk about is the hour of the end times, the hour when, you have the Amam Mahdi and the Yajuj and Majuj, which, we'll talk about in a bit. But basically, the hour is, the end of our earth here. And there's basically a, heaven, hell, all that stuff. So like I said, the Quran itself hints at Arabia's greener past. In Surah Yasin, it says, "And a sign for them is the dead land. We bring it to life and bring forth from it grain, so they eat of it. And we placed therein gardens of palm trees and grapevines." And what's interesting is that the geological record confirms that the Quran is correct. While today we see endless sand dunes, the Arabian Peninsula was once fertile and lush. The Quran references this in Surah Al-Hajj, and it says, "And you see the earth barren, but when we send down upon it rain, it quivers and swells and grows, something of every beautiful kind." And archaeological discoveries have revealed ancient river valleys and lake beds and fossil remains of creatures that have only, could have survived in these wet, lush, green environments. And this, again, aligns with the Quranic description in Surah Al-An'am. "It is he who sends down rain from the sky. We bring forth from it greenery." And modern climate patterns are shifting in ways that, again, are pretty strange with these prophecies. The Quran speaks of environmental changes in Surah Al-Araf and says, "And if only the people of the cities had believed and feared Allah, we would have opened upon them blessings from the heaven and the earth." Today, parts of Arabia are experiencing unprecedented rainfall patterns. I mean, the UAE has a cloud seeding program, and Saudi Arabia has what seems to be sudden floods that, again, kind of echo the prophecy about Arabia's return to meadows and rivers, though perhaps not in the direct way that people had expected. And despite a lot of this rainfall, we're witnessing a paradoxical decrease in vegetation. And again, this mirrors the Quranic warning in Surah Ibrahim that says, "Their deeds are like ashes, which the wind blows forcefully on a stormy day. They have no power over anything they have earned." Modern development and urbanization have kind of created a situation where more rain doesn't necessarily mean more greenery. So the Quran cautions about this type of imbalance in Surah Al-Rum, saying, "Corruption has appeared throughout the land and sea by what the hands of people have earned." So the Euphrates crisis brings another prophecy into sharp focus. The prophet says, "The hour will not come to pass before the river Euphrates dries up to unveil the mountain of gold." And so today, the Euphrates River is facing a bit of a water crisis, with levels dropping dramatically. And the Quran warns about water scarcity in Surah Al-Mulk and says, "Say, have you considered if your water was to become sunken into the earth, then who could bring you flowing water?" This prophecy isn't just about environmental change. It's about the resource conflicts that would emerge as nations are now battling over water rights, just as kind of the prophecies suggest that they would, battle over, the river's treasures. And as anyone knows, I mean, if you're building a nation, you need water, both as a trade route, but also as a way to grow food and vegetation, a way to protect yourself from enemies seizing. And with dry riverbeds, you have none of these things and your society effectively collapses. So it's an interesting problem as you're having a lot of rainfall, as there's, obviously predictions in the Quran. You're also having a dryness of these riverbeds and a crisis in the Euphrates, which again is directly described in the Quran. Pretty interesting.
هكذا تكشف نبوءات القرآن عن رؤى عميقة للواقع، تذكرنا بأن الإسلام يقدم إجابات عقلانية لألغاز العالم. إذا أثارت هذه الاكتشافات تساؤلاتك، شاركنا رأيك في التعليقات. هل ترى هذه النبوءات تتحقق اليوم؟ لا تنسى الإعجاب بالفيديو، الاشتراك في قناة فيرا للمزيد من القصص عن الإسلام في الغرب، وتفعيل الجرس ليصلك كل جديد. شكرا لمتابعتكم، والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.